wrist cock-up splint. You're going to lay a paper towel beneath the client's hand and forearm, and you're going to draw a pattern of the splint onto the paper towel before you draw it onto your thermoplastic. So again, remember your splinting principles. You want the trough of the splint to be 2/3 the length of the forearm, as well as 2/3 the width of the forearm, 1/2 to 2/3. So you're going to draw a pattern along your paper towel, okay, of your forearm. You want to be as precise as possible because that will limit the amount of cutting that you're going to have to do after you fabricate or during the fabrication process. As we talked about in your lectures, areas of irritation is typically the ulnar styloid as well as the radial styloid. Okay, ulnar head and the radial styloid. When you're drawing your pattern, you need to identify certain areas. First being, we want to identify the metacarpal head, which volarly is going to be your distal palmar crease. Okay, we know that here is our metacarpal head for the index finger. We need to identify that landmark. You need to identify the web space between the thumb and the index finger, and then at the base of the first CMC joint. Okay, so now we can draw lines here for our tab. We can have the client remove their forearm. Then all we can essentially do is we want to connect our dots. Okay? Now we're going to cut the pattern and test it on the client. So we have the client aside. We'll take our scissors, and all we're going to do, it's like grade school, is we're going to cut our trace. Okay? Now, as you can see, we added some tape because we took 2 pieces of paper towel, because here at our health center, the paper towels can be a little bit short depending on the splint that you're making. So we wanted to have an adequate piece of paper towel, so we just simply taped 2 pieces of paper towel together. So we're going to follow, always remember to follow your pattern. Okay, don't need to leave extra material. So after you've cut out your pattern, you want to put your pattern back on your client just to make sure that it's going to fit appropriately. Key areas that you need to ensure is that your pattern is at the distal palmar crease, and that also that it clears the thenar crease, which would be here, to allow for unimpeded thumb motion. Other problem areas are you need to make sure that your pattern is 2/3 up the length of the forearm, as well as 1/2 to 2/3 up the width of the forearm. And we want to make sure that it clears your radial styloid well, and also that it does not impede through the ulnar head, and that it will be long enough so it doesn't cause any squeezing or impingement of that while you're wearing it, because this tends to be a site of irritation on our clients in our wrist cock-up splits. So this pattern looks satisfactory. So right now we're going to move on. So now you're going to place your pattern onto your piece of thermoplastic. Okay, now you don't really want to use a pen, but in our labs we won't have China markers. But in the clinical setting, you never want to use a pen on your thermoplastic. Okay, so all we're going to do is you're just going to trace the pattern along our thermoplastic, and then we're going to heat it in our hydrocollator to soften it. So you want to place your thermoplastic in the hydrocollator, and for your initial cut, again depending on the specific material, you maybe want to leave it in there for about 45 seconds. We don't want it too soft. Okay, so right now it's not too soft. Okay, so it's just soft enough for me. You want to do little cuts like this. You want to try to do nice, big, straight cuts. Okay, this material does have self-finishing edging. Okay, so all I'm doing, you want to be very careful how you handle the material so we don't overstretch it. Again, if it has rebound, it will stretch back, but we don't want to overstretch the material. And all we're doing, after we cut it, again, we're going to lay it back down on the hydrocollator. After about 90 seconds, now the material is going to be nice and soft, that then we want to take it out of the hydrocollator. We do not want to take it out this way because gravity is going to stretch out the material. We want to try to take it out this way to minimize the stretch and dry it off on a towel before we bring it to our client. After you get your heated material, you want to lie it down on your client, and you want to begin with rolling out the thinner eminence and then rolling out your distal palmar crease. You always want to do your rolling when the splint is at its warmest. Rolling will increase cosmesis, but more importantly, it improves the strength of the material as well as it provides some contour. We need to flare the proximal edge just slightly. Now, there are many ways you can make a splint. You can use this way where gravity is assisting. You can also use a tensor band around it. You will decide which way you like to use it or how you like to fabricate and what's most user-friendly for you. The main thing is don't be pinching your material, leaving fingerprints and indents because that can become a pressure spot later, as well as it doesn't look professional. So now that it's formed, okay, it is fairly warm. We want to look to ensure that it clears the radial styloid, and it does, so it doesn't look like it's going to pinch on that structure. We want to just make sure that it's approximately 2/3, half to 2/3 of the width of the forearm, which it is. And when we try to pronate and supinate, if it's impinging through the ulnar head, and it appears to not have any pinching there. We want to make sure we round our edges when we're cutting. Okay, so we're going to need, as you guessed it, 6 Velcro pieces, maybe 7, okay? If you have access to a heat gun, you should heat the back of the adhesive of the strapping Velcro. We're going to place it at the distal end of the splint because we don't want to mechanically shorten our splint by placing our straps too proximal.
You can just
I may be a little bit nervous because I'm on camera. But you can't see me smile because of my mask. So I do not like that. That does not look pretty. Okay? Cosmesis of your splint is very important because it represents the profession. In our splinting lab, we will not have access to closed cell foam, but in a clinical environment, you may or may not want to choose to use closed cell foam on your tab in order to increase comfort to the dorsum of the hand. That is a personal preference, which maybe we will leave that up to you as clinicians, period. So, after we've placed our Velcro strapping, as well as some closed cell foam, in order to provide some padding over the dorsum of the hand, we will apply the orthosis to our client with our strapping. You always want to round your edges. To increase cosmesis. And we always need to strap over the joint we are immobilizing in order to neutralize our reciprocal parallel forces. We want to round our splint edges. And that's what I'm doing now. You think that may not matter, but your clients will always ask you to do so, and they will complain about it on subsequent visits. Now, we're just going to cut this 1-inch strap a little narrow so it can fit through the web space. Now we can adhere to the Velcro, come across. Then now we want to check fit. We want to pronate and supinate. Make sure that it's not pinching over the radial styloid or the ulnar head. We want to make sure our straps are applied, in particular over the dorsum of the wrist, and otherwise I think this splint looks satisfactory.